And deployment news, city officials have put the brakes on what was going to be the largest municipal broadband network in North America. I'll be right back. Hey, this is Rick Uzzi here with Broadband Deployment News. So the City of Toronto was going to build a municipal broadband network. It would have been the largest municipal network for providing broadband service in North America, but they have decided not to do that, at least not anywhere near as far as the kind of efforts to bring broadband to people that live there as they were planning. They're still planning on upgrading the network and for their own purposes, and maybe to allow some people to tie into that, but they're not planning on starting their own internet service, or at least providing an open access network. And we're going to talk about that today. I was going to read through this story. So see here, Toronto is giving up on North America's largest municipal broadband network. In January of 2021, the City of Toronto announced a sweeping new initiative to improve internet access for its 3 million residents. By building a broadband network owned by the city, the program called ConnectTO would give low-income residents struggling with high prices and slow internet speeds an affordable option. The proposal, received favorably by local community groups and internet access advocates, was passed by the City Council less than a month later in February 2021. So this was, this was kind of in the midst of the pandemic. A lot of people were concerned, hey, there's a lot of people that don't have good internet. We're seeing that. A lot of people can't afford it. So obviously in this country, we did a lot there as far as spend a lot of money to try to improve internet service, but also affordability. There were a lot of, there was the emergency broadband benefit that came out, now succeeded by the Affordable Connectivity Program, or seceded. So a lot went on in this country. I'm sure Canada was looking at similar things, and here in Toronto they were looking at what they could do primarily for affordability, because again, like recent situations like I've talked about, for example, in Jamestown, New York was one where they were looking at building, a broadband network, but it's primarily for affordability, because in Jamestown, for example, in New York, they actually have better broadband availability there than they do, for example, in Buffalo, New York. So it's not so much about whether people can get broadband, it's whether it's affordable. And that's the concern. If you've just got maybe one or two providers, sometimes it's not affordable. So it says now, barely a year later, the plan for municipal broadband Toronto could be on its way out. At a City Council meeting on May 4th, the Council's Executive Committee amended the plan for ConnectTO to exclude two provisions explicitly dedicated to building a municipally owned network, after staff in the city's technology office recommended this language be struck. Toronto's network would have been one of the first municipal broadband services in North America to serve a large urban population where cables, towers, and other infrastructure for broadband exist, but cost prohibits everyone from accessing it. So again, cost is the issue. So in Toronto, obviously, there are major service providers, and certainly in urban areas where there are lots of potential customers, they have the infrastructure there. The question is, is it affordable as it's provided? The Toronto Star reports that the move is coming after a lobbying campaign by two of Canada's largest telecom companies. The private sector companies argued the city would struggle to build their own broadband network, and could better allocate money to subsidize existing internet services for low-income residents. And there is a case to be made for that, right? So if there's already good infrastructure from multiple providers and cost is the issue, why overlay another infrastructure on top of that? Well, the thought is that'll provide competition for these private operators, but really it can also drive the competition completely out of the business, because if you've got a municipal owned utility, they see it as a utility, a broadband service, they see it as a utility, and they are going to be able to pay for that, let's say via taxes, and they're not necessarily, they don't have to make a profit. So it's really hard for a private company to compete. Toronto's plan for city-owned broadband. So Toronto's goal was to build out a new internet service provider from scratch. Wasn't to build out a new internet service provider from scratch, but rather to build on existing city assets to create a more affordable internet option for some residents. It's interesting it says some residents, because that's another way to approach this. With monthly broadband charges as high as $100, the cost precluded many residents from accessing crucial internet services. And I'm assuming this is in Canadian dollars, which is about, that would mean about $77 US. For the most monthly charges there. And it says here to create a more affordable internet option for some residents. That would be one way to go, would be to say, okay, we're just going to, for those areas that are low income. The city is going to put in municipal broadband there because we can provide it less expensively than private companies. And if the private companies wanted to lower their price to address that community, they could. If they don't want to, then that could be where the city could go, is to focus on those areas, because it's not so much about broadband access everywhere. It sounds like it's broadband affordability. Since the city already owns a cable fiber network for municipal operations and services such as transit and traffic management, ConnectTO was conceived as a way to build more connections to this network while partnering with a private sector ISP, it says a private sector ISP, to deliver internet into people's homes, especially in underserved areas of the city. So they're saying here they're already connecting up a lot of their infrastructure, traffic lights and probably buildings and those kinds of things with fiber already. And so they've got fiber in places. They probably got a fiber ring in places around the city, those kinds of things. And they could, there's a lot to expanding from there, because you've got to do the last mile to everybody's home. And that's a pretty significant undertaking versus just connecting some buildings and traffic lights. But they're saying they would build upon that. And it mentions here a private sector ISP. So it doesn't sound like they were really interested in providing the retail internet service, and maybe they were going to partner with one private sector ISP, or maybe they were talking about an open access network where they would let multiple ISPs do that. I don't know, but it just mentioned specifically a private sector ISP. So maybe the original concept was to bring in one service provider, maybe contract with one ISP that wants to do this for them. But city staff have now cut the recommendation that the city endorse the proposed creation of a city-owned high-speed municipal broadband network that would eventually be used to power city facilities and services and help ensure equitable access to broadband internet for residents regardless of their financial means or circumstances. So it had multiple goals, one of which was to improve city facilities, but also then providing this affordable broadband. Representative from the city wrote in an emailed statement that this change does not mean stopping the program or its goals, and that the city will focus on improving the city's existing broadband network and creating some extra capacity that could be leased to private ISPs, but without a firm mandate to work with ISPs to use city-owned assets to provide affordable broadband access. The centerpiece of the policy has been gutted, at least in the eyes of a community justice organization that championed it. So they're saying, okay, maybe they'll expand their own internet for internal use, but maybe also build out infrastructure that can be leased by other ISPs. That could reduce the cost of some of these ISPs so that they don't have to do that on their own, although it sounds like they're already in there. So you already got Bell Canada, you already got Rogers in there. They've already got their own infrastructure, so I'm not sure what that would do unless they lease that to another ISP that's going to then use that to create another competitor. Telecom giants Bell Canada and Rogers telecom giants Bell Canada and Rogers Communications firms lobbied city officials, especially members of the executive committee, the leadership board within the city council that sets its priorities. In a letter to the committee, a Bell representative insisted that a city-owned broadband network was unnecessary, saying that it would duplicate existing infrastructure, and questioned the city's ability to offer internet that is both high speed and low cost. The city can certainly offer internet that's high speed and maybe at a lower cost than private companies, because again, number one, they don't have to make a profit. They could sell it at cost. Number two, acting as a utility, they're getting their money from taxes, so they can kind of subsidize some of that taxes from everybody and put that towards internet and keep prices down. But again, is that a level playing field if you've got private operators there? A city staff representative said the lobbying had no bearing on the recommendation to remove the municipal broadband network language. I find that hard to believe, but that's possible, I guess. Chattanooga's path to municipal internets. They bring up Chattanooga here as a shining example of how municipal broadband can work. It says local governments, especially in rural areas, have taken it upon themselves to build their own broadband networks as broadband internet has come to be seen as a critical piece of infrastructure over the past 2 decades. But they've faced an uphill battle from regulators and private companies looking to curb competition. So it mentions here, especially in rural areas. So Toronto's not rural, right? But yeah, in rural areas, one of the challenges has always been, if you've got areas where you don't have a lot of customers, then the incumbent provider has less incentive to go out there, because if they're going to spend a lot of money building infrastructure, it's going to be very costly because they've got lots of miles to build and they've got very few customers there that are going to help pay for that once they get that set up. So that's one reason that in rural areas it does make sense sometimes, because the private operators just they're not doing it. They're not getting it done because there's not incentive for them. The profit incentive's not there. And it mentions here that the uphill battle from regulators and private companies looking to curb that competition. It mentions here that such restrictions exist in at least 18 states in the U.S. Some of that's starting to diminish because of the federal dollars that are coming into the states, especially with the bipartisan infrastructure law, which says that you cannot exclude municipalities, you cannot exclude co-ops. So as states make decisions on whether they want to get this money and then be able to offer it in their state, the $42.45 billion that's destined for the states, then a lot of these states are going to make decisions, we can't be restricting broadband in that way because we can't use this money. So we'll see what happens there. It says a few places have managed to build despite these odds. Chattanooga, Tennessee is the most successful example of a municipal broadband network. The city of 180,000 built out its own fiber optic network managed through its Electric Utility Commission. Despite lawsuits from Comcast and AT&T, Chattanooga built out its own high-speed internet network. By 2021, it served more than 120,000 households with 300 megs per second broadband, compared to a U.S. average of around 150 megs. So obviously that's great internet. And that's what people are paying for, because actually they were offering gig symmetrical, and now I think they've got 10 gig. Back in 2015, they might have upgraded that to 10 gig. In the decades since coming into existence, Chattanooga's municipal broadband has created $2.69 billion in community benefits. That's kind of a nebulous kind of thing, but it does make a big difference. If you get broadband, especially really good broadband throughout the city, then it really does help. It's got a significant economic impact. So that's what they're looking at there, while also posing a viable competition to private ISPs in the area. And obviously that's true. So if they're providing broadband service at high speeds and they're able to keep the prices down, then any private operators in there have to either go out of business or they have to lower their price to the point where they can maybe still make a profit and compete. The municipal service is available to offer faster speeds at lower prices than private competitors. And again, why? Because they don't have to make a profit. And the private competitors, at the very least, that's something that they've got to do that the city does not have to do. Now, it says here it's been in place for a long time. So this service was, I believe, built out in 2011. So we're talking like, maybe it was 2010. We're talking 11 to 12 years now that this has been in existence. So obviously, the lay of the land was quite different back in 2010 than it is right now. Obviously, we had the pandemic and we saw how important broadband was, but there are a lot more people now that have broadband from private operators, that have fast speeds from private operators, because a lot of that work has been done over the last 10, 12 years in lots of different places. Where we still have some issues are again in these hard to reach areas where it's very expensive to build out the infrastructure, and you still have some issues with price where affordability is a question. For big cities like Toronto, where the primary barrier to broadband for many people isn't connectivity but cost, going toe-to-toe with the ISP to offer an alternative service may be a riskier bet. Bell suggested that the city's resources would be better spent on subsidy programs to help people afford their internet bills rather than bringing down costs overall. There's a case that could be made for that. I mean, I don't know what they're talking about spending, or what they were talking about spending if they were going to build out this infrastructure everywhere. But if they could take some of that money and put it towards subsidies and making sure that people can afford it, that it's got to be, you got to make that, you have some tests for that people are going to be low income, because you don't otherwise you're going to be providing low cost internet to people that can certainly afford it. So that's another option, is to look at that. City representatives, ads keep popping in. City representatives have said that they're now focusing ConnectTO to improve connections within the city's existing broadband network and expand access to free public Wi-Fi at public spaces such as libraries and community centers. Such measures will certainly improve broadband access, but lower prices may not happen unless the city can encourage more competition among the small number of for-profit companies dominating Toronto's broadband market. So they've got probably, they've got Rogers, they've got Bell Canada, they might have one or two others. I mean, I'm sure there are some fixed wireless providers in places here and there. So there's some competition. But, obviously the more competitors there are, the more you're going to have the for-profit companies competing both on services to try to increase the value that people are getting, increase the speeds, increase the amount of data they can download, as well as increasing the quality, so people, because you've got competitors out there, you want to make sure people stay with you, and then keeping the price as low as possible. So that's what the city's trying to do, and that's what a lot of cities are trying to do. But really, the main focus right now should be on where there isn't broadband. There isn't good broadband right now. That's what we're trying to do in this country. With the bipartisan infrastructure law, we've got the unserved and underserved areas that are going to be targeted first, and all the money or any money that goes through that program has to go to the point where all unserved and underserved areas are addressed before it can go anywhere else, even before it goes to anchor institutions. Then it's anchor institutions. After those are served, any anchor institutions that are not getting 1 gig symmetrical service, then you can apply the funds there. And then after that is when you can start looking at providing funds that can then be used to overbuild competitors or private companies that are already there. So again, the question is on affordability. Competition can bring that down, but then we also have subsidies that they were talking about here. So in the United States, they passed the Affordable Connectivity Program, which is part of that bipartisan infrastructure law, and that provides a subsidy to people who qualify of up to $30. And that can certainly go a long way. And if broadband is $50 and you're getting a subsidy of $30, that brings it down to $20. In a lot of cases, broadband providers are creating a plan that is at $30. That is a good quality internet connection for $30, and if the person qualifies, they can get that for free. So that is likely where I see that $30 mark. In the infrastructure law, it talks about anybody who gets money from this has to provide a low-cost option, but the NTIA has not been specific on that. Now, maybe when the NOFO comes out on Friday, is when we're expecting it, it may have more information on what would qualify as a low-cost program. But as far as the bill is concerned, it sounds like it's going to leave that up to the states, and it might vary from state to state. So in one state, a low-cost plan might be $50, maybe Alaska, because it's very expensive to provide service there. In another place like Rhode Island, maybe it is $30 because it's less expensive because you got more people living close together. So we'll have to see how that works. But a subsidy program like that can address the issue of affordability, and the main goal of getting internet, making sure everybody can get access to internet, is covered then as well. So you can get access, make sure everybody has access to a broadband connection. If they can't afford it, it doesn't help. But then you provide the subsidy and they can afford it if they want to take advantage of that. Thanks for joining me. If you like this video, go ahead and give me a thumbs up if you would, and make sure you subscribe, click the little bell, and be notified when I'm live. Lots happening this week, especially like I mentioned on Friday, we're expecting the Notice of Funding Opportunity for the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and specifically BEAD, the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program. There'll probably be a NOFO on the middle mile portion of that bill as well. So that'll be exciting. We'll have that probably coming out on Friday. I don't know if it'll be early enough where I can talk about it on Friday, but certainly I'll look at it after it comes out, and I will probably do multiple broadcasts depending on how big and complicated that is on what's going on with that NOFO. So thanks again, and I will see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.